The following program is brought to you free of charge by the sponsorship of Novus Ordo Watch. See for yourself that the Church of the Second Vatican Council is not in fact the Catholic Church of the ages. Go to novusordowatch.org.
Welcome to Restoration Radio. I am your host, Justin Soeder, this morning, and we are joined by Father Anthony Cekada, Assistant Pastor of St. Gertrude the Great Catholic Church in Westchester, Ohio. And we are here at St. Gertrude this morning for a special live show for our listeners, discussing a new show from the 2014 season entitled The Work of Human Hands. And you may have heard us speaking about this on the air with Father and the Clerical Conversations show and the True Restoration show. And this is the book Father Cekada wrote. It is the definitive critique of the quote-unquote new Mass of Paul VI. And we are very privileged to have some of your time this morning, Father. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
So, Father, as you know, throughout our season, we had a lot of calls from the Novus Ordo, or the Novus Ordo folk who are lost and a little bit confused about what's going on in the new Mass and things they see in their parish. And I think this book is a great starting point for them to see, essentially outline in great detail everything they're experiencing.
Well, that was part of the rationale for writing the book. Most people come to have doubts and questions about the way things were going on in the post-Vatican II Church because of their experiences with worship. And if you give them a lot of data on the problems with the post-Vatican II way of worship, then you get them thinking about other issues as well.
I was reading the preface last evening, and I saw in here it says you began this work when you were 13 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
Explain some of that to our listeners. How does that work when you begin a book at 13 years old?
Well, not that I was, precocious or anything like that, but I had an experience actually similar to that of a number of my contemporaries as traditional priests, Bishop Dolan and Bishop Sanborn, in their respective home dioceses when they were kids. The Vatican II changes in the liturgy were sort of traumatic, I suppose, because it seemed so irreverent and so different from what we as Catholics had been used to before. So I remember being very struck by that there were these changes in the liturgy, and I really didn't like them. It seemed that there was something wrong or something less reverent about them. So this was a feeling, actually, that I carried with me, actually, for quite a while. And eventually it led, many years later, of course, to the idea of writing this particular book.
Something that I noticed here in the book, as I was reading last night, and in fact we were speaking about this yesterday, was this overarching term, the quote unquote Novus Ordo.
Okay.
Everything we refer to today as the Novus Ordo, which refers to the conciliar church, the modernist church, if you will, the church after the council. This is where it all begins, essentially, is the Novus Ordo Mass to sort of mutate into where we are today. So I think for our listeners, this is something, this show, which will follow the book, I think is going to hopefully answer a lot of the questions. And as you know, through some of the calls that we got this season, I read this portion of the book. You said, even from my first year in the seminary high school, I wanted to be part of the battle. And that, I think, is something that our callers who are just discovering tradition aren't necessarily aware of, that this is a battle.
Yes.
That you have to battle your way. Could you talk a little bit about that through your battle to where you are today?
Well, what happened is, as a result of Vatican II, there was all this ferment going on at every level in the church. And you found that you had professors, and even in the minor seminary, who were very much in favor of very radical changes in Catholic beliefs. Then you had some people like myself who said, wait, the church's beliefs really can't change. So almost immediately there was a fight and a controversy between two sides and two parties over where things were going to go. Even in freshman religion class, which probably would have been in 1965, I remember arguing and fighting with my professor over some of the things that he proposed and some of the changes that he favored. So immediately it became a battle, and as the Vatican II changes were implemented, it sort of broadened and became deeper, and you saw more and more in the way of changes in the church. The term that you use, Novus Ordo, is one that people started to use in 1969 and 1970, when actually the new Mass of Paul VI was promulgated. And it simply means the new order, and it referred to the Novus Ordo Missae, the new order of the Mass. But you correctly discern that it became sort of a more general term for the whole new order of things after Vatican II, because of all the different things that the new order of discipline, the new order of doctrine, the new order of worship overthrew.
The new church.
Yeah, the new church. So it's a very convenient term, and sometimes traditional Catholics, such as ourselves, will refer to the whole institution of the post-Vatican II Church as the Novus Ordo, or will refer to someone who is a member of the post-Vatican II Church as a Novus Ordite. So it took on, the term originally used for the Mass took on a much broader use.
Just a point of reference, I mean, that's not solely meant to be a derogatory term, just one of the classification.
Yes, it's one of classification. It's very convenient.
Mm-hmm.
Just as it is to call us, we call ourselves trads or traditionalists, and that is a convenient label. We actually consider ourselves to be simply Catholics.
Right, exactly. Sure. I think something that our listeners are going to appreciate is, if you read in the preface, Father was much like all of us at one time, thinking that the problem was just the interpretation of the council, and that they were just bad liberals, quote unquote, who were essentially causing all the things that he saw that were offensive. And you said that belief changed in 1975. Mm-hmm. What happened in 1975?
Well, in 1975, I kind of got to the end of the line in the post-Vatican II seminary system, because we had these fights when I was in the prep seminary, the minor seminary, and things ecclesiologically just and worship-wise simply got worse and worse. And I used to all the time say that the changes were misinterpreted, that the rubrics for the new Mass were misinterpreted. They needed to be taken in a more traditional fashion. And then, of course, our beloved Holy Father, that, if he knew, if he only knew what was going on, as I suppose they used to say in Germany, if the Fuhrer only knew what was going on.
Right.
Well, in this battle that I had ended up fighting eventually led me to join what was then one of the most liturgically conservative religious orders in the world, the Cistercians of the Common Observance. And we had more Latin than you could shake a stick at, or a crozier at, or whatever you would shake at Latin. And we had chant, and the divine office was in Latin, and the Novus Ordo was in Latin. And the only thing in the vernacular were the readings. The order sent me over to what was supposed to be a very conservative monastery in Switzerland. The idea was that I would learn French and then study at the University of Fribourg, which was supposed to be doctrinally very conservative. Well, what happened there is I discovered that my contemporaries even though they were in a monastery that liturgically was very conservative, nevertheless, the theology they were learning was modernist. That was one problem. Mm-hmm. Also, in the midst of this, all this Latin liturgy and chant, you had communion in the hand, which was extremely strange. And then at that point, in 1975, there was a controversy in Europe over the traditionalists and over Archbishop Lefebvre. And I had not heard all that much about that controversy when I was in the United States, but since I was there in Switzerland, naturally it was very much in the news. And the abbot then would talk about this in his sermons to the monastic community, what was called the chapter. And I found that many of the things the traditionalists were saying that he was relating to us, I agreed with. And the defenses that he was putting up for the changes, primarily under the idea of, well, we have to obey no matter what happens, these I found extremely unconvincing.
Well, I find your story some 25 years before mine, well, even earlier than that, or I should say even longer than that, it's very similar. When I was trapped in the Novus Ordo, I too was trying to find the conservative pockets, if you will. And I find that even is true today, that those who are really disgusted with the clown masses and the dancing lectorette masses mm-hmm. and all these other abuses they see, they try to find themselves and assimilate into these little conservative pockets until they find something there that's amiss as well. And then that's kind of the catalyst which moves them down the line until finally they really see the monster for what it is.
Yes.
Yes. And I think that's when the real progress happens. Tell us about a little bit, writing the book. How many pauses did you have in the writing? I mean, how long successfully did it really take you over a period of time to achieve the result of the book?
Well, first of all, I had to come to the conclusion that something like this was needed. Mm-hmm. And I got thinking about it a little bit after my ordination to the priesthood in 1977, when I was asked to teach liturgy at the new Pius X seminary in Armada, Michigan. So I figured that, of course, on the sacred liturgy, naturally we would want to talk about the Novus Ordo Missae, about the new order of the Mass, and do a comparison between that and the Old Mass. And so I tried to find a text that I could use as the basis for this course. And it was surprising, though, even 1977, I really couldn't find a text that gave really a complete overview of the difficulties with the Novus Ordo Missae, with the new order of Mass, the Mass of Paul VI. I kept on looking, and I didn't really have any success in finding anything. There were shorter works that talked about some aspects of the new Mass, but there was nothing that was really complete. There was a book by a man named De Silveira that had been published first in Portuguese and then in French, called The Mass of Paul VI, What Should One Think of It? But this book, I thought at one point of translating this book, but it turned out that the organization the author was affiliated with didn't want this book promoted anymore. Then there was the book of Michael Davies that came along. Michael Davies was a convert to the faith. He was a Welshman. He would have been insulted, I guess, if you called him an Englishman. Yeah. And he got involved writing about the situation of the post-Vatican II Church under the name, I think, of Owen Michaels, something like that. Mm. Eventually, he wrote a 3-volume history, or 3-volume discussion of what he called the liturgical revolution. And the last volume of it was Pope Paul's New Mass. that book I also found rather unsatisfactory because he devoted a lot of his time to liturgical abuses. And he did a very good job drawing the parallels between the new Mass and the Protestant communion service. He did that at great length, and that was very good, and pointed out a number of problems with the new Mass. But he didn't really talk about one of the key issues, which was modernism.
Right. That seems to be kind of the thread with the Michael Davies books, is that he tries to essentially explain away the problems without drawing any conclusions. That's kind of what I saw in his books. I mean, it's not pulling the weed out of the ground; it's just cutting it off and letting it grow back, so to speak.
Yes, that's exactly it. And his book was 650 pages long, and the conclusion he gives is basically sort of a nothing conclusion to it. He doesn't really draw anything together, and the book doesn't really end properly. It just sort of stops. Mm-hmm. So also, what Davies did not do was discuss in any serious length the propers of the Mass, how those have been changed in the Novus Ordo. There's the distinction between the ordinary of the Mass, which are the parts of the Mass that remain more or less the same whenever Mass is celebrated, and then the propers that vary from Sunday to Sunday and feast to feast. And there have been some radical changes introduced into the propers of the Mass, but Davies didn't get those down either. So at a certain point, probably in the early 1980s, I figured out that I would probably have to research a book and eventually address all of these different issues.
I think, admittedly, that would have been hard for a layman to do, though, not having formal seminary training, theological training to really pick out the different parts. I mean, I think that for most traditional Catholics who have come across Michael Davies' works, there's a lot of benefit there, mm-hmm. but nothing like what you've assembled here, which is really a surgical dissection of each problem with the Mass. I don't think Davies would have been really capable of doing such a work.
Well, yeah, he was good in many points, but with a priest, you're more attentive to a lot of the details and to the rubrics. Mm-hmm. So there's that consideration. But the other bizarre factor, I suppose, as far as myself writing a book like this, is when I look back on it, I'd been exposed to and experienced all different types of liturgy. And I certainly knew the pre-Vatican II liturgy very much as a kid before Vatican II. I happened to be in the seminary as these different changes were introduced. The official ones first. I saw all of the crazy abuses. The seminary and in different churches where I worked, I was also an organist. I ended up in the most conservative religious order in the world. Then I ended up in the Pius X Society, where they had a kind of an altered form of the traditional Mass. So I had all of these different things that I had been exposed to, and chunks of them ended up in the book.
I think that's something maybe our listeners don't know, and if you don't know, you should go to truerestoration.org and check out some of Father's interviews. I think that there's this this belief amongst most people that when you went to the Society Seminary in Icone, it was the beautiful Latin Mass, and there was never any problems there, and that it was you had found everything you were looking for. And that's not the case.
No, it wasn't. And I only ended up there because I wanted to be a good and faithful Catholic priest, and I was actually sort of surprised by how they conducted the liturgy there. There was a changed form of the traditional Mass that they used there, with pulpits where the readings were done facing the people, and prayers at the foot of the altar were dropped at certain points. And it was certainly not, from a liturgical point of view, at least the first year that I was there, it certainly wasn't really correct at all. You couldn't really follow, you couldn't really learn how to conduct a ceremony there from reading an old traditional liturgical book, because they had their own way of doing it.
Interesting. Well, for our listeners kind of wondering where the show is going next season, now at the Work of Human Hands, we're going to cover probably one chapter, maybe a chapter an evening, one Thursday per month, and we're going to go through the 14-chapter volume. And if you would like to buy the book and follow along, you can go to sggresources.org, and you can order the book from Father, and maybe you can even bribe him to put a little autograph on the book for you. Matt stipend's always welcome. So, Father, let's talk a little bit about the reviews and how, or I should say, how the book has been received by, since you released this edition. What have people been saying? Have you had any surprise reviews, any surprise commentary on the book?
Well, there has been quite a bit of comment. You have to understand the market, as it were, the target audience that I aimed the book at initially was not so much traditionalists, because it would have been a little bit of preaching to the choir, but people in the Novus Ordo who had real worries about the direction the liturgical reform had taken. So we were, I think, very successful in reaching out to these people. We didn't try so much to get reviews from traditionalist publications, but it was from the Novus Ordo, conservative Novus Ordo circles, that we tried to get reviews, and we tried to promote it. We figured that the rest of people would go along. It was actually very successful. There's a lot of positive comment about it. I had a excellent review by Monsignor Andrew Wadsworth, who is the head of the International Commission on English in the Liturgy.
Oh.
He was responsible for the supposedly more conservative translation of the new Mass that was introduced in Novus Ordo churches about 2 or 3 years ago.
Keyword supposedly.
Yes, supposedly. But he had a number of positive things to say about it. A Christian Order, which is a conservative to traditionalist review, highly respected in England. They had a good review by Dr. Jeffrey Hull, who is a known in conservative circles for a book that he himself did on the liturgical reform. The most interesting of the reviewers was Dr. Elquin Reed. Reed was known for a book called The Organic Development of the Liturgy, and he was very much part of the movement that Cardinal Ratzinger belonged to, this idea of trying to do the liturgy, the Novus Ordo liturgy, in a more traditional fashion. In fact, Ratzinger actually wrote a preface to Reed's book. So he gave the book actually a rather favorable review as well. There's an interesting story, though, on this. Initially, I had contacted the magazine Inside the Vatican with a view toward having Reed's review published there. And Inside the Vatican is run by Robert Moynihan, who's a very nice guy and a very good journalist, and he, in fact, was going to run this positive review by Reed. However, what happened is just before it was to go to press, I discovered, that someone had applied pressure. And it was drawn. It had been typeset, and I guess was actually on the press. And someone had gotten to Moynihan, so Reed had to publish his review elsewhere. So that was one of those things, but to publish it, he did.
I think that our listeners are going to receive this show because we're going to cover a wide variety of listener. We're going to cover the liturgical nerd, so to speak, who wants to really dive into
geeks, which I certainly would have counted myself among. Yeah.
Yes, myself as well. And I think that it's also going to really hit at a beginning audience as well. And I want to encourage our listeners to realize that we're not just going to read the book page by page, because you can do that on your own. We're going to get Father's commentary in a sort of a summary of each chapter and comments on that for points for you to think about and reflect upon it, and of course maybe Father to expound a little bit more than he does in the book. But we obviously encourage you to get the book and to read it. Where, Father, do you see in a season-long show, what would you like to see accomplished on this show coming up?
Well, I would say it's a good opportunity to give people an overview of the book. And as you say, on certain points, you can't cover absolutely everything in a book like this. I had to cut out an awful lot to keep the argument going and to keep things very clear. So we can perhaps deepen some of the points that I mentioned in the book, and on other points give people a summary or sort of a flavor of what is going on.
Mm-hmm. When we originally had thought about doing this show at the summit, it was with the hope that we could sort of provide an outlet, maybe a beginning point for people as well, because we received a lot of phone calls on the program about this, about I'm just in the beginning, and where do I go, and what's wrong with the Mass, and can I fight from within? I think a lot of these questions are going to be answered in the program, and hopefully you do buy the book and follow along and read at your own leisure. And you can always email Father Cekada as well as we go along in the program. You can mail us also at mail@truerestoration.org for any questions we can pass along to Father. Well, Father, I think this is a good place for us to kind of close our interview here and the primer for the Work of Human Hands show for next season, which is going to air on Thursday nights. Time to be determined yet, but it'll be a 60 to 90-minute show. I would encourage our listeners to go ahead and buy the book. I encourage you to read, as we've joked about during the show, because you're really not going to pick up what the enormity of the times we live in, the crisis in both the church and the world, if you don't read. Father's book here, it's only 400 and roughly 400 pages, not including the index. And we compare that to the Douay-Rheims Holy Bible, which is 1,200 pages, and we have the Liber over here, which is 1,000 pages. I mean, this is an easy read, right, Father?
Very easy, and unlike the Liber, to get through it, you don't have to sing it.
That's right.
But what I did as for the benefit of the readers is that at the end of every chapter, there's a 2 or 3 page summary with bullet points. So if you start to nod off, you can just go and find out how the chapter ends and then go on to the next chapter.
The Work of Human Hands for Dummies, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Well, Father, do you have any closing thoughts for us that you'd like to encourage our listeners to do, or to kind of get them to sort of wet their whistle towards the show here?
Well, as we said, read in general, and the new Mass is actually sort of emblematic or symbolic of a larger and a broader issue of the problems in the Church after Vatican II. It's not the only problem, but merely one of the problems. And if this book points you in the right direction for examining some of the other problems, then it will have achieved its purpose, I think, very well.
Well, very good, Father. I think that's a great place to stop, and I encourage our listeners to go to truerestoration.org, and you can find many video interviews with Father Cekada, as well as Restoration Radio. You can hear Father Cekada on the True Restoration flagship show, as well as Clerical Conversations on the Crisis, where he appears with Bishop Donald Sanborn many times over. And you also check out sggresources.org, and Father has many videos posted there as well. You can buy the book, The Work of Human Hands. And Father, we thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
This program was brought to you free of charge by the sponsorship of Novus Ordo Watch. See for yourself that the Church of the Second Vatican Council is not in fact the Catholic Church of the ages. Go to novusordowatch.org.